left off prior to the lunch break and finish up this lesson here. Then we got one more lesson that I want to make certain we complete before the end of the day today. Now tomorrow is going to be an interesting day. There are a couple of the lessons at the end of this that are largely summarizing stuff. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on those tomorrow, but we will be giving you guys the opportunity of going through your example certification exams tomorrow afternoon. So I hope you guys are looking forward to that. That'll give you a good idea of what's going on with the with your current understanding of where you are as far as the subject matter on Core 1 and Core 2. Oh, and by the way, I want to let you guys know I received an email over lunch from a student that I've had in my class. So over the last about a month and a half or so, William has gone through several of my classes, and he sent me an email yesterday telling me he had just passed his Core 1 A+ exam, and he's going to be taking the Core 2 this weekend. So, and he told me he passed his Security Plus exam last week. So he's coming right along there. So mighty proud of him. Now, mobile devices are things that, I mean, we talked about yesterday. They are prolific. They are everywhere in being used in corporations all over the world now. And as I said yesterday as well, we're finding now there's the second generation of young people. In some cases, the mobile appliance, the mobile phone or the tablet or the hybrid phablet device, is their only computing appliance. We're raising the second generation of young people that can type 60, 70 words a minute with their thumbs, which is pretty interesting. I also mentioned that many organizations now are beginning to incorporate these enterprise mobility management software suites of products that have basic three functions inside them. We have mobile device management systems, mobile application management systems, and the unified messaging systems. They're all baked into these things. It usually you go through a process to where you register the mobile device with typically through some kind of web interface, and register it so that it is known, if you will, to the enterprise mobility management systems. That gives them the ability of quite a bit of control over those mobile appliances, no doubt about it. Now, the enterprise mobility management systems gives an additional layer of security on those systems and sort of gives the corporation the ability sort of reach out and touch that device, as well as to manage it from the device configuration and the software configuration perspective. So quite a bit more control, especially from the security aspect, because I mean, personally owned systems are a wide open security vulnerability, so they have to be very tightly controlled. As far as connecting, sharing information, sending, receiving data, etc. Now, Windows shares is another concept we need to be very particular about setting up. And when I'm talking about shares, I'm talking about sharing a network folder, a directory, but even also sharing things like printers, workstations, printers, storage devices across the board. I have my home network here set up with several folders that are on my Windows machine, several directories that are on a couple of the other systems, but I have those created as shared objects so that my wife and anybody else that's hooked up into the network here will be able to view those shares inside there. For instance, their File Explorer. When they fire up their File Explorer on their desktop, well, those network shares will show up in their listings as well. For each individual appliance, I can, when I have it defined in my system, if I do a right click on the device or a right click on the folder, well, I can then define the sharing options there. I can assign it a specific name for the device, which will show up as the device name in their network view as well. And then I can pretty much decide the access and permissions that I'm going to allow for each of those shared appliances, shared folders, shared files for every individual user or group profiles and so on. There's another pretty clever thing here. Windows has been doing this for a long, long time, hiding files. And I can do that by using this same concept here. If I just append a $ to the end of the name, whatever the resource might happen to be, the folder, the drive, the file. And I'm not talking about the extension now, the actual file name itself. If I append a $ to that, by default, Windows hides that. It cloaks those files, folders, whatever. So if I am sharing, say, a folder to the public at large, but there happen to be certain files or subfolders inside there that I want to cloak, I just append the $ to the end of that name, and they don't show up by default. Okay. I can then go into the individual appliance or the resources, the files, the folder, the directory, and determine what access other users will have to it. This is the way it might look in the File Explorer here. If they pull down their network item here, any devices that are spread out in other parts of the network will show up in the listing down here, right below here. Okay. And for instance, a printer has been shared here. Well, I can now map that printer to my device. Same thing with a shared file or a shared folder. I can map that folder, for instance, to a logical disk drive on my system. So it's a two-step process. Whoever owns the folder will turn it into a shared folder, and then whoever needs to use that folder, they can map it to a logical disk drive on their system. And then, if they're given read-write permissions to it, they can store objects in there as well. I've got a couple of folders on my system that I have marked as read-only, the share to other people on the network. And then I've got one specifically that I have marked as it's almost full ownership with my wife's profile. So, but it exists on my system, but she has access to it from her mobile phone, her tablet, and her laptop device, all three of those. So they show up as just another item in your File Explorer. And once you have it mapped to your system, then whatever permissions you have to it, it's just like having it locally attached to your system. If I'm doing a map in a drive here, I can use either the right-click menu do it, or I can use the net use commands to create the share, and whatever the share name is going to be. That's the 2 backslashes, the host computer name, a singular backslash, and whatever I want to call the share. And then the user on the other end will map that to a logical disk drive on their side, drive M or drive J or whichever drive they select in the drop-down list when they do the mapping. The net view commands will allow me to view any shared resources there. Here's the way I would do it with connecting a printer. I create a printer as a shared device, and then the user, when it shows up in their particular network list like so, they do a right click on that and say connect to it. Well, then that printer is then mapped to their computer system. Every time they log back in, their Windows environment will seek that printer out, and if indeed it's online, well, it maps it back to their systems and connects to it, so they can print directly to that as if it were a locally attached printer there, even though it's going over the network connectivity. So very, very cool, functions there, being able to share those appliances, as well as sharing the files, folders, directories, things like that. Now, one thing very important you need to remember here about the shares. I can create file permissions locally on my system, and that is my NTFS, my new technology file system. So I create say a folder on my system, and I assign, let's say, read-write access to everybody else on that. But then if I turn that into a network share, and I assign read-only access, well, that actually overrides the initial definitions there, okay? And it works in both directions. Now in Windows, I basically have 5 different layers of access and permissions that I can assign either to an individual profile, group profiles, or the universe at large. I can give full ownership, full control rights to it. I can do a read only, a read and execute. I can do a modify, which is write and delete even updates. And for folders, I can assign list accessibility, where they can list all of the components inside of a folder, including files and subfolders as well. Well, I can go in through the permissions for a particular file or folder or whatever the resource might happen to be, and allow or deny those permissions like so. Okay. I want you to remember though, NTFS, the new technology file system, is one set of permissions. The share permissions is a different set of permissions that can be assigned, oftentimes for the same resource. And you have to think about it along these lines. Whichever one is most restrictive is the one that wins out. Okay. For instance, let's say I have a folder here. And in the NTFS permissions, I have given full modification, which includes the ability to delete items or that folder itself. But then if I make it a network share and I define or accept the default, which is read only, well, for everybody else, that overrides the permissions assigned to the initial object. So once again, whichever one is most restrictive wins the day. If the NTFS is more restricted, it overrides the share and vice versa. And by the way, the read-only permissions is the default, by the way, if I create a network share folder, a file, or a subfolder, something like that. So you have to always remember that. Now, in the Windows networking environment, Windows is considered sort of a Windows kingdom, as it were. And then I can set up individual domain controllers to sort of subdivide and submanage, as it were, all of the users that are within that particular network. Okay. A Windows machine, when I load it up and it's a professional license or above, has capability of joining a Windows domain network. I can set up permissions on that system and even add an additional drop down on the login box. I can assign that user only to a singular domain if I wish, or I can create profiles so that that user can log into multiple domains, now only one at a time, but in addition to their user ID and their password on the login panel, also give them a domain drop-down list box where they can select the specific domain within my larger Windows network that they can log into. Right? Now, of course, I have to, make certain the permissions are updated and that they have access to those particular domains as well. But and of course, you have to do administrative have to have administrative privileges to set up that type of access and control there as well. So I can have a singular user that, in essence, can log into any of the available domains as long as I have it configured properly. Okay. I also find now too, and this is something that has been utilized conceptually anyway in the Unix and Linux environments for ages, ever since they've been around, is defining what's referred to in a large network environment as a home directory or a home folder for an individual user. That contributes to a very interesting concept in the large networks called a roaming or a roving profile. Now, if you have individual computer systems set up in like a peer-to-peer kind of network, then typically that user's credentials are only valid on their home computer system. And I'm not talking about in their home, but I mean the home system that they normally log into in the enterprise. Most of those that the peer devices as a client and a server, they have their own local storage, run their own applications, that kind of thing. Now, in Windows domain environments, theoretically anyway, sometimes network admins and operations personnel set it up where they don't have this capability. But theoretically, if you have a set of login credentials in a Windows domain environment, those credentials are not managed on each individual host computer. They're managed in the domain controller in a centralized database. So theoretically, that user can log into any of the workstations in that Windows domain. And in order for it to be able to, wherever they happen to log in, whatever workstation they log into, I need to have all of their home resources, as it were. So basically follow them around. So that's where I will use the login scripts. And wherever they happen to log in, I will, in essence, map their network storage devices, their network folders, their network printers. I will map the access to those to whichever workstation they actually log into. Okay? And I oftentimes accomplish that by way of the login script that I was talking about. The login scripting is yet another thing that I can interact with directly using that group policy object editor we talked about earlier as well. Okay? So there's roaming profiles, here they call it, roving profiles. It is copied into whatever workstation the user logs into. And it's oftentimes directed by way of a login script. That's the same login script that I made reference to earlier that may allow me as a systems administrator to basically peer into the workstation or the device they're using to log in on to make certain that it is in compliance, that it follows whatever compliance, hardware, software compliance rules and regulations I've set up. Yet another thing I can enforce with the group policy objects and the security policy object as well. Part of that scripting engine and that part of that roaming profile also with the personalized directors, personalized folders, personalized resources that users may have their, like for instance, their storage is on a clustered centralized storage appliance, even a network attached storage or storage area network. But it redirects and basically redirects the access to those to wherever the user happens to log in. So I like that roaming roving profile. That's something that's been around, we've had forever in the Linux and Unix environments. Unix, of course, way before the Linux. But it's something that's relatively new within the last couple of decades anyway, and to the Windows environment. I like it a lot. It gives us that free movement throughout an enterprise network, and the same concept with those roving or roaming profiles directs the user's resources to wherever they happen to log into. And you can even have that cross the boundaries between remote and local logins as well, and have the profiles roaming wherever they happen to log into. So pretty clever design there. We've seen that same kind of thing, like say in other larger mainframe networks, mid-range networks, Linux and Unix networks forever. Relatively new to the Windows environment. This is one of the labs that we are going to do for sure. I will be assigning this one as part of your homework tonight. That's where you configure a shared folder and then map it to a secondary system. So it shows you exactly how to perform that function. You might get a question about that very specific thing on your certification exam. So bear that in mind. Definitely going to be working through that lab for sure. Okay. All right, everybody. Jump on in over here and go ahead and fire up your quizzes. I want you to go and do the practice quiz for lesson 14, the one we just completed there. Okay. Managing Windows networking, 20 questions total there. And I do want you guys to go and then repeat the previous quiz, and let's see if we can't bump those scores on up a bit. Okay, so go ahead and start working on quiz lesson number 14. Then I want you to go back and repeat lesson number 13 quiz. There's 15 questions total there as well. Now I'm going to set your timer up for 30 minutes. That ought to give you ample time to actually do both of those quizzes. And then, of course, I want you to post your scores. Once I see your posted scores, I'll go ahead and kill the timer, and we'll jump right on into the next lecture portion here. Now, you folks that are following with us on YouTube, of course, you'll not be able to participate in these quizzes, but if you wish to hang with us, we will be back right after this quiz function that the user's doing here now, and then going to dive right on into the next lesson. So appreciate all you joining us out there, and feel free to hang with us because we got more lecture coming here, and it's going to be less than the 30 minutes. They always finish these quizzes much more quickly than that. So you guys just hang. All right, there we go. That's what I'm talking about. Excellent stuff there, folks. All right, I'm going to go ahead and clear this timer here, and let's get on into our next lecture portion here. Well done, everyone there. Now, this lesson gets the sort of the same kind of thing that we did with the managing the windows, where we're going to take a look at it now, look at some of the command structures and some of the utilities that we have available to do the same kind of thing in your other operating systems, but specifically Linux and Mac. Now, I told you guys and gave you the link earlier to the major Linux distributions. There's many more than the 8 or 9 that was on that link that I gave you. There's about 24 very well-known, reputable Linux distributions here. I was telling you guys I run 5 different ones here, and you really should. I noticed this one was not on that list, but I'm going to give you a link to this one here. There's the 9 best that we saw, but this one I like a lot. This is one of the prettiest ones I've ever seen. It is an open source. Let's see where I can get to it. Is an open source version of a Linux operating system. It's really pretty. It has the look and feel to me of Mac OS, the Apple Mac OS type of environment. It is a Debian, it's actually Ubuntu based, but it's just beautiful. It's an absolutely gorgeous distribution. The desktop overlay that's on top of it. Let me find a good download link for you here. It is completely open source. It is really nice platform here. Very easy, in my opinion, to use. There's the 8.0 version of it for the download. And like I say, it's a visual treat, no doubt about it. So there are a whole bunch. I mean, you can't think of a application requirement that you can't find an app for it, online for free. And I tell you, with that and a couple of other Linux distros, those things are really beginning to bite at the heels of Windows and Mac OS because they're free. I mean, 100% free. All of your Linux distribution, doesn't matter what they are. This just happens to be an Ubuntu screen here, but all of them have a not exact, but a common look and feel. They all have some type of desktop. They call it virtual desktops environment where it creates, in essence, multiple windows. They all have, for instance, like this guy. If you click this button here, that launches the application icons in the middle of all the apps that are installed under this distro. I can create these virtual desktops and folder access on the main screen just like I can in Windows or Mac OS. This over here would be very similar to my Windows taskbar or the Mac's Docker. Up in the top right corner here, as opposed to lower right-hand corner for Windows, is your status area, your time clock, your speaker for your audio functionality. It also maintains a date and time clock timer for you, same thing. Over on the top left corner here, they have these drop-down windows, drop-down menus. All of these guys, their command line interface is referred to as a terminal or a shell program. but it serves the same function. You can issue commands in the shell editor. The shell editor for most of your Linux distributions is an editor called Bash, BASH. There are a couple of other shell editors that are available, but that's the one that usually comes along primarily for these, especially these Debian-based distros. The terminal is the like the command line interface, the terminal window. That's this guy right here. That's what the icon for the terminal window looks. That's where I use the shell editor and enter commands. Many of the commands in the Linux environment are same thing as you have in Mac OS, Windows, Android, other systems as well. And but most of them are either acronyms or abbreviations for the function they perform. The Linux command syntax is very cut and dried. You have the basic function is the command word or command acronym or abbreviation. You then have multiple options that you can feed with a singular tick mark, or some of them are, they call it double ticks. And then there are arguments, and the arguments are typically either a file or a directory. Have to understand everything in a Linux and a Unix environment is considered a file, everything. A disk drive is considered a file, a workstation is a file, and all files reside inside directories. There are no folders in Linux and Unix and Mac OS. It's a directory. There is in the Windows environment where I showed you guys, where you type on the command line interface, type help to get all the commands. And if you want help on a singular command, you type the command name followed by a blank space / question mark. The help text on here is the man command, short for manual. And it's really good too. If I want to get help here, for instance, the ping command, I type in man space ping and I get help text for the ping command. There are like type of applications that run in this environment too that mimic the same functionality as some of the ones in Windows. These are like your notepad. Okay. These guys here, there's Nano, there's another one called Pico, there's VI, there's VIM. And these are they're variants of them. Some of them operate only as a command line function. A couple of them have what looks like a graphic user interface, much the same as the notepad on Windows. Um, and there's half a dozen or so different file editors that are available from in the different Linux distributions. You have some of the same commands in the shell editor here that we have in Windows. For instance, the change directory command, CD, same command. The directory command in Windows, dir, well, its counterpart here is ls, list directory contents. There's a display file contents called catalog, or cat is the command. There is your list, whatever current directory the cursor happens to live in. There's a pwd command there. People tend to think that's a password command, but it just lists current directory functions. You have here your ext file hierarchical system here in the Linux and Unix environments. There's the grep command. That is, it's a search tool built into a singular command. There's the find command that allows me to find specific characters inside of a string of data. The grep command is where I can search keywords, file contents, and I can set up pretty sophisticated filters for pulling information out from this starting point to this starting point, things like that. The commands that we have available here as well, some of them same kind of commands as we have in Linux, or I'm sorry, in Windows. Your remove commands allows me to delete a file or a folder. I have commands that will allow me to move or copy contents, files, contents, copy it from one location to another, move it from one location to another. And in the move, I can even move it from one location and assign it a new name in the target location. So, multifunctional kinds of commands that we have available in the different editors, shell editors. Another slick thing about most of these shell editors as well is that I can create my own commands. I can just put together a script of multiple command functions and save it, in essence, same concept as doing a commandlet in Windows PowerShell. And I've now even seen a couple of cross-hybrid applications that will allow me to run Windows PowerShell commands in a Linux environment and vice versa. Linux shell level commands in a Windows environment. So, cross hybrid kind of applications that support both directions there. I have the super user do command. I told you about that earlier. That's like the run as administrator function in Windows environment. Or if I want to switch users, switch from one user profile to another, and even switch to the super user or the administrator account, I can do that. Of course, I have to know the administrator's password. And then there are commands here that three special commands that I use for manipulating individual user profiles, and three specific commands I use to manipulate, actually four commands that I use to manipulate group profiles. Okay? User add, user mod, user delete, group add, group mod, group delete. And then I can assign credentials or permissions and access. There's a whole command set for doing that on individual objects. I can create new groups of users. I can create extended groups of users. The change modify command, mod command there, allows me to change basically three different permissions for three separate groups of users as it relates to a singular object, a file or a directory or something like that. The thing about Linux as opposed to Windows, I was telling you, Windows got actually 6 different permissions that I can assign. Linux cut and dried. It's read, write, and execute. That's it. A read is read only. Write contains everything else, change, modify, update commands. And then execute says I can run a program. Okay? And then I can use the change mod command there to assign those three specific credentials to three groups of users. The first group of users is an individual user profile. The second group of users is a group profile. And the third is the rest of the universe at large. I can also assign those permissions with the change mod command using what they call octal values, 7, 4, and 2. I'm sorry, 4, 2, and 1 totals up to 7. The read permissions is a value of 4, the write permissions is a value of 2, and the execute permission is a value of 1. So if you see, for instance, in a system log, something like this, where they use the change ownership command, and it's assigning for a specific user profile all 7s, that means that it has assigned read, write, and execute access to individual user profile, group profile, and the universe at large. And then it will name the specific file or object that is assigning or changing that ownership to. So pretty cut and dried. Now, this is an example here. It's difficult to see right here, but this is an example where the change mod command is being used to alter permissions, in this case for a file known as office products.txt. And what they're doing here is changing the ownership for this particular local host user, it looks like here. And it is assigning what appears to be ownership capability there for this particular file to this particular user. Okay. Now, they may ask you a question or something along those lines on your exam. They'll show you an output here, and well, what is line number 12 performing? What kind of function is it performing there? Okay. So they don't get real deep into it, for instance, but that might be one of the questions that you get there. I talked to you earlier about the program package management functionality here. The one that I use on my because 4 of the 5 Linux distributions I run are the APT style, the Debian based permissions, and it uses the APT package, the advanced packaging tool is what that acronym is. But that is the tool that allows me to manage those downloads and the install of the program updates, operating system updates. The apt-get allows me to pull changes down, and then apt-get update, apt-get install. Those allow me to use the APT function to do those functions as well. And that is for all of the Debian-based Linux distributions, use that particular advanced packaging tool. The others, the Red Hat base, they use the function called Yellow Dog Updater and Modifier, YUM. And it does the same thing. I can check for updates. I can download the updates, install the updates on a particular system there. And that's for the other major platform configurations there that run the Red Hat type of Linux distros, those guys. So it's a little bit different concept according to the type of Linux distribution you're running. And most of the updates are presented in this environment as an ISO mountable file. And you download it typically from some online server somewhere, and then you update the existing systems. And it's not, the graphic user interface oriented thing. This is command line stuff. And all of the updates and everything roll up, and many of them are color coded too, by the way. The color coding tells you if it's a directory, if it's a file, if it's a system under the covers in the system code, application program, operating system, distribution. And it just, very rapid. And sometimes these ISO files have thousands of different update file functions. But that is the management, the package management, the two major kinds now. And almost all of your Linux distributions use one or the other. Okay. They also, most of them, use digital signatures for integrity checking. I was talking about the updates I get from MIT. Prior to them sending me the ISO file, they will run it's called it's an encryption algorithm, but it's referred to as creates a digital signature, in essence, digital fingerprint. Hashing algorithm is what they call them. But they will run that hashing algorithm, and they happen to use one called MD5 sum, message digest version 5 sum function. And it runs that over the unencrypted ISO file, creates a digital fingerprint for it. Then they use the public key, private key. They encrypt the ISO file. They send me the encrypted ISO file, the digital signature of it in unencrypted format. When I receive that, I use their public key that I have that is transmitted to me to unencrypt the ISO file, and then I run the same MD5 sum function over it. And in a little over 10 years now, never not once has my digital signature and the one that they sent me not been the same one. So that tells me that the ISO package file has not been intercepted, it's not been changed. The file they sent me is indeed the file that I received. So then I go through the apt update process and then update either the operating system or the application programs, whatever the ISO is designed to update. Okay. The package management kits, most of them also do either digital signatures like that, or they run it through some kind of antivirus, anti-malware checks just to validate the integrity of the file there. Now, just like in the Windows environment where we have the performance monitor, they have the same thing here. It is your process monitoring, and the same thing on Windows where I have, say, if I have a program that's misbehaving and I need to go in and halt the running of that, I do the same thing here. In Windows, I do it with my task manager. Here, I do it with a couple of commands. The PS command shows me all of the processes that are running. And one very important piece of information that it shows also is the process identifier, the PID. I then take that PID and if I identify which process is not working right or is hung up or whatever, then I use the kill command, KILL, and feed it the process identifier of the process that's misbehaving. And it's the same thing that I do in the task manager in Windows. There, I just highlight the app, say kill it. Here, it's two different commands. Now, I have seen, and maybe it was the elementary OS that had a very similar task manager graphic user interface function as part of that operating system distribution. But most of them is just command line stuff that's utilized to manage that stuff. Same thing on the process and performance monitor in the Windows environment. I have the tool suites here that I can do that with the process monitoring commands here as well. It shows me a listing of all of the active processes. And the same thing as in the Windows environment, it shows me the utilization of the four major resources, the CPU percentage, time slice, the main memory, network bandwidth, and storage that's being used by each individual process. And it also shows me the user that that process belongs to. There's the process identifier. Okay, here is the amount of CPU time, amount of main memory time it's using. And if you scroll on out in most of these, it will also show you storage that's being used, network bandwidth that's being used as well. Okay. So I have all the same kind of functions in the Linux and the Unix environment and the Mac OS environment. A lot of them I have to get to only from the command line interface. Here's a couple of commands I've already spoken about. The IP command, that is shows me in essence the same type of data that is in the IP config or the IF config. Now there is an IF config command in most of your Linux distributions. Same information as IP config that we looked at earlier. Now, in some older, we don't see it as much in the updated versions of these distros, but some of them had there was IF config for wired configurations and IW config for wireless configurations. In lots of now, both of that functionality has been rolled up into the singular IP command. Gives you the same kind of information there. There's the dig command. That's the analogous to the NS lookup command in the Windows environment. Allows me to manage my DNS, troubleshoot problems with the DNS services, and query basically the DNS database, that kind of thing. And whereas in Windows we talked about the server message block SMB, this is a version of it that allows me to share files between Linux, and there's also another application, I don't remember what they call it, but there's one like this in the Mac OS environment too that allows me to share files across those boundaries between Linux operating systems, Windows, Mac OS, and Windows. Unix also uses the Samba kind of function to share files with Windows as well. In the Windows world, we have the task scheduler. Here we have the same thing, except they're called cron jobs here, short for chronology and chronological jobs. In a cron listing, we have what we create what's called cron tab entries, and that's just an individual task that's scheduled based on a date and time to run it. Okay. We have the same thing in the Windows environment. You got zip files. Okay. Here they have tar. I've seen also RAR and gzip files. It's a compressed file, is what it is. There's also same thing in the Linux and Unix and Mac OS world with backup and recovery tools. In Mac OS, their backup and recovery system is called Time Machine, and in Linux, it is several different types of backup products. Some again in some of the modern Linux distros, I've seen this a nice graphic user interface for the backup utility, and some of it is just using basically a combination of a singular command. It's called DD, data duplicate, and it is a full backup and recovery tool in a singular command set. Okay. So, and I'll tell you now, in Linux environments at the command line access there, There are literally thousands of commands available. And you have to understand, Linux is an open source network environment, open source operating system environment. So if you know scripting languages, if you know how to use the Linux command line interface and the shell program and the terminal editor, well, you can create your own commands, much like creating commandlets in PowerShell in Microsoft. And that with so many different Linux distributions and it being a complete open source operating system, well, the command sets and the functionality just keep growing and growing and growing. I tell you, that's another reason that we are beginning to see more and more people are adopting the Linux operating system environment. A, it's free. B, there's such widespread worldwide programmer level support. And I'll tell you, man, the supporting groups and organizations that support the Linux code, they don't put up with any foolishness. They will find and weed out before you can say don't do it. Anybody trying to sneak malware, virus code into their code repositories in their libraries. Okay, so they take their security very, very seriously. Actually, way back in, I guess this was back in the early 1980s, late 70s, 1980s, there was a young developer by the name of Linus Torvalds, who, just like me, feels like that operating systems should be free and application software should be free. So he wrote the Linux kernel code, the Linux operating system in general, and just gave it away, just gave away all of the original source code. And now it's freely available to, I mean, millions of very talented programmers out all over the world. Now, some of them, just like in any populace, are evildoers. So they are trying their best to use this freely available world here for nefarious purposes. Okay, so we just need to get them all into a dark room and pour 30-gallon barrels of cruel and unusual punishment on their heads repeatedly until they stop doing that. So but we'll see. I know, like I said yesterday, don't judge me. A man can dream, right? You certainly need to use or to learn how to use your Linux command line tools, no doubt. I highly recommend this book, the Linux for Dummies here. It is an excellent reference guide. I'm getting close to wearing this one out here because I use it so much. I am currently trying to work on, and it's more for my personal gratification than anything, to earn my Linux Plus certification. I do not feel like I will ever be qualified to teach it because I'm just not. But it's something for me personally. I think I may go ahead and push through and do anyway. Now, Mac OS is a little bit different beast in and of itself. It is a beautiful, beautiful operating system environment. It was written from the ground up, as I told you guys earlier, as a very creative type of approach. It was designed, I think, from the metal up for multimedia development, programming, and utilization. We now have seen over the last decade, a decade and a half or so, they've begun to move a lot into the more business world utilization and acceptance as well. All of the things that we have available in any of their operating systems, we have available here as well. They have their terminal, which is their command line interface. It uses two basic shell editors. Bash is the basic one, but there's another one here we've seen, ZSH. It uses the multiple virtual desktops that I spoke about. It houses and manages and manipulates those inside of a tool suite called Mission Control. It has their search function. It is called Spotlight. There is also, in the Mac world, there is a tool called Finder, which is the same concept as the File Explorer in Windows. Okay. And people tend to think Finder is the search tool. It's not. Spotlight is. You have, just like in any other distributions here, you have a very, beautiful configurable interface. It uses this mission control to create the multiple window type of looks. Even taking a cursory look at these icons that you see here, a lot of those, if you got anybody that's an Android user, an iOS, and then some even of your Linux distros, they're all starting to look and act and feel the same. Okay. This is your system preferences screen, analogous to the Microsoft system screen. There's still some very specific hardware components that we see, especially in the MacBook Pro and the Macintosh systems themselves. Apple was one of the very first to come out with the mouse, and then it became very widely expected or accepted in the rest of the industry after that. They use a encryption algorithm or encryption system here. I talked about BitLocker in Windows. Here they call it File Vault. That's the disk encryption utility here. They use a, whereas in the Windows environment, you get your Microsoft ID, and in the Google environment, you get your Google ID, and have access to the Google Play Store. Well, Macintosh and Apple has the same thing. You get assigned an Apple ID, which can be utilized across the board in a lot of areas in the iCloud, the Apple iStore, iTunes, and as well as logging into your individual systems as well. This guy has a built-in, they call it keychain, which manages like internet credentials, much the same as our um, credential management functions that are built in usually to our web browser. Here in the Apple world and Mac world, they manage that with what's called a keychain. There's Finder. That's the file management. Your file explorer as you know it in Windows. iCloud now, and that was originally it was same sort of thing as Dropbox, but unique to Apple and Macintosh. Now we're beginning to see that they're sort of opening that up more as a subscription based thing for pretty much anybody to utilize. Macintosh systems, that's the default as far as doing their online backup synchronization functions. Here is the package managers. We talked about these a bit earlier. The DMG and the PKG package management pieces here. Very similar to those that are used in some of the, especially the older Linux distros. This guy here has a program management function too, much like the task manager in Windows, where if you have a misbehaving application, you go in and kill the application with an online operating system based applet or application program. Same thing in Windows. You could set it up for doing automatic upgrades, and now Apple is notorious for that by just pushing software and operating system upgrades automatically. And I hadn't had a Mac OS system in quite a while, but any of you guys that are Mac users, do they have the auto update system turned on by default? I know in all the systems that you could manage that, but I don't know what they've done with that as of late. So, but again, the great thing about Macintosh and Apple, not on the Macs that we have work. Okay, yeah, yeah. Now those may have been set. I don't know if it's still a configurable thing or not. I'm guessing it probably is. Um, the operating system here, like I say, they don't expire an older version of an operating system. They just keep updating it and giving it these new clever names, for the operating system. The last one that I remember, and I'm guessing there may have been updates since that, but the last update I remember on my system that I had was the Sierra Nevada, I think they called it, and that was the latest version of the Mac OS system, and that's been at least a couple of years ago. So I don't have no idea what the latest one is even called here. You can set up your Macintosh system the same way that you can any other computer system. You set it up as a wireless connection. You set it up as a wired RJ45 connect. When these systems are joined into an IP network, they have the same requirements. They have to have an IP address, a subnet mask. They have to have a Here they just call it the router, which is the gateway appliance, the router that's closest to the system. Have to give it that address, and I'm thinking that it may even still default to the DNS server being the same as the gateway device. Now, another clever thing that I've seen here, and this actually occurred, gosh, this had to have been right after around 2001, 2002. The old MacBook Pro used to have a built-on on-board optical disc burner. I mean, it was a DVD burner right on board. They stopped making them on the MacBook Pros back then, and they created this concept called a remote disk, to where you'd have like a Macintosh system, big tower chassis system with the optical drive, and sometimes multiple optical drives, burners built into that singular chassis. And all the other systems that were in the network, on the desktop, there was an icon that said remote disk, so that you could actually treat that target system, or that system that was located in the large target device, as if it were locally attached. I could burn DVDs on it. I could read information from it, that kind of thing. But they stopped putting them into the MacBook Pro right after the turn of the of 2000 there. And I think it's still like that. I was telling you about the time machine. The backup functionality is built into this applet program called Time Machine, backup and recovery, and the Apple file system APFS is the way that the disk drives on the Macintosh systems are formatted. And now it also supports some cross-system compatibility with files and directories as well, but it has to be formatted properly. And across just about every system, it's a file formatting system that is specific to an optical disk drive, either a CD drive, DVD drive, or Blu-ray drive. And so you can share files among multiple systems running different operating systems with that particular compact disk file system. So I think that's still supported on most systems. Here's the force quit thing I was talking about with the task manager in Windows. Here, in order to bring it up, you can go through the system control panel, or you can hold the command, option, and escape key down, and it pops up the task manager. And just like the applications manager, just like in the Windows environment, whatever application is misbehaving will show up like this, okay? And then you just say force quit, okay? And it kills that application. Same thing I would do in the task manager in Windows, okay? Same thing I would do in Linux by doing the PS command to list all the processes and the kill command with the process identifier. Okay. So same sort of thing there as far as the management and the functionality of the operating system. And again, they all have the same functions. They're just presented in a little bit different mode. But as I said earlier, we are beginning now to see that all of these things are beginning to look and act and feel much the same, which to me, I'll tell you, frankly, is a little bit scary. We've just never seen this much camaraderie and sharing of same technologies and processes, and even the look and feel of these things makes me think maybe that Skynet may indeed be right around the corner here. I don't know. You got competing entities here that are all playing by the same rules. I'm sorry, that's a little bit scary for me here, guys. But I digress. All right. For you YouTube viewers, I'm about to once again close the curtain on you all. My team internal here now is going to do a couple of more practice quizzes. And I'm going to go ahead and give these guys their afternoon break. And I'll see you folks on YouTube probably early tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate your time and attention. And good Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, maybe we'll see you all in a class